Welcome back to the Cannabis Community Insider. We've been away for a couple of weeks, but we've been working on some exciting projects. And today we have a very special guest that we want to introduce, who will be talking about a fresh perspective on cannabis policy and social equity in Illinois. And that special guest is State Representative Dina Delgado. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Abraham. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk a little cannabis with you guys.
Fantastic. Mark, let's get started.
Sounds good. Representative, thank you for being here. And you're, we'll stipulate up front that you're a little under the weather, but we are grateful for you still keeping this commitment. It, in fact, I think demonstrates something about your approach to your job. So we appreciate it. Let's start here. I think when the cannabis laws, the adult use law passed in Illinois, I don't think you were in the legislature yet, were you?
I was not. The adult use bill passed at the end of 2019, and I was appointed to my seat in November of 2019. So I came in after all of that had been passed, and kind of was tangentially aware of what was going on, but was not in the thick of it when it was actually getting passed.
Well, thank you. So you are relatively new, which is, I think, a great perspective, because I think in some ways, folks who have ownership of an issue, having sort of voted for it, have a different degree of, ownership of it. And so I think your perspective is really good. And obviously, in addition to that, you are an attorney. You've had public sector and private sector experience. You are the daughter of immigrants, the quintessential American story. A couple of folks who who sacrificed, I'm sorry, probably criticized it a little too. I'm Jewish, so I know my parents criticized, but a couple of folks who sacrificed so that, amazing to see their daughter be a state representative in the state of Illinois. How do they feel?
Oh gosh, they're over the moon about it. I'm originally from Texas, but I've been living in Chicago for 20 years. So as I say to folks, I've been in Chicago longer than I've been anywhere else. So I consider myself a Chicagoan. Now, my husband, who was born and raised here, has some things to say about that. But my parents, when I decided to run for this seat, actually moved up here because they wanted to be a part of the whole experience. They wanted to help. They wanted to, just engage, and we're so incredibly proud. So I was happy to have them here. I was happy to have won, because I think it would have been a real downer if I had lost and they'd come all the way up here to hang out. So imagine, my Texan parents who, my mom kept saying, does it ever get warm in Chicago? Like, it's always cold here. Just wait, you gotta wait until June, and then it's gonna be like Texas hot. So, it'll be fine. But yes, they were incredibly involved, incredibly excited about it all. And they continuously call and ask me, what's going on? What kind of issues are you working on? And cannabis is one of them. So I was really excited to kind of share with them how I was starting to learn about the industry, learn about what's happening at the legislative level, and really trying to dig into some of the issues that we've been talking about.
Well, thank you. And perhaps that's a great segue to get into business. So, walk us through the evolution of Representative Delgado's education. By the way, I can't help but make one comment. Representative Delgado may be the only person in Illinois who has a positive record of having taxpayers moving into the state. So I congratulate you. We're +2 on your behalf because of you. So that's in and of itself, I think, a positive story. But with that aside, so when you got into, when you got in, you started paying more attention. Was this something your constituents have been contacting you about?
So to me, the issue of cannabis for my constituency is much more about what is it going to bring to the state in terms of revenue, right? And so, when my constituents talk about needs and wanting with the state to be able to provide certain things to them, for me, cannabis was part of the solution, right? Legalized cannabis, recreational use. These were parts, ways to drive more revenue that were a little bit different from what we've been trying to do in the past. So in terms of my community's engagement, that's usually what it's been focused on. And one of the great things about the legislation as it was passed in 2019 is it created the R3 program, which is Renew, Reinvest, Restore. And huge amounts of money being pumped into that program. They just issued their first set of awards. One of those awards is coming to Belmont Cragen, which I was very excited about, and have worked very closely with the Safer Foundation to be able to put something together. So, it's early in the process. We're still hoping to make improvements, right? Anything that we start for the first time always has improvements to be made, but that's definitely one of the ways that my community was interested and engaged in the topic of cannabis. So for me, back in 19, and even before that, I was kind of tangentially aware, right? Knew that this was happening, was excited to see how social equity was at the forefront of the conversation in Illinois. And that Illinois was basically breaking ground on making the most social equity focused cannabis legislation in the country. So I knew about that, but coming into the legislature and kind of being there when the implementation was happening, and of course the impact of COVID and how that changed the way things were supposed to be rolling out. May 1st came and went on the social equity applicant front for the dispensaries, and just kind of seeing and watching how the administration was implementing. And again, to my point about there's always ways to improve. So credit to the administration for putting it out there. But as a legislator, we're always out there trying to find ways where we can make things better, right? And there are certainly a lot of areas where I think we can make things better. So that's where I started, and that's kind of where we are today.
Well, I really am also excited about the cannabis tax dollars being used to really, help communities, perhaps help individuals change their lives. I believe myself that cannabis can help heal people and communities. And by the way, it's Safer Foundation, great work. My hat off to Victor and Sadika and everybody else. And just like your husband, one thing Eric and I have in common is we have much smarter, more important wives. And my wife does some work in consulting with the Safer Foundation. So it's just great to have all these commonalities with you. But I look forward to seeing how that program's implemented, because if it's done right, it could really help some people. And maybe we can have you back on to talk about that as that rolls out. So it was interesting to me, you talked about your focus being on sort of the solution part of the cannabis equation through revenue and what that revenue can do. So are you, have your folks, have you heard a lot about licensing? Are some of your folks among those thousands of frustrated and waiting? And yeah, of course, you mentioned dispensaries in May. Now we had craft grow, infusion, and transportation that were due July 1. Those are late also. People are sort of, what I'm saying is, people are sort of bleeding money, particularly people of color, and the sharks are in the water. The white sharks are in the water circling, for that analogy. And so yeah, you came into a mess. you know, and it's great for a change to be talking to somebody who you know, wasn't there and again, has a different perspective. And how's it going this year? Sort of, you know, I would have hoped there would have been opportunities for the legislature to fix some things already. So I think there are, you know, thousands of us watching very eagerly, trying to engage in the process. And that's one of the great things about talking to you is that, you know, I bet you there are constituents of yours who were never involved in government or advocacy until this issue came along. And now some of them are watching this, and, you know, I can't say that I'm proud of the way it's going, but what's going on now? How, you know, what's the talk? What's the Latino caucus's sort of priority on this, and how's it going to unfold?
Sure. So the Latino caucus has been engaged on this issue pretty much since the summer of last year, right? So the governor convened a number of working groups, brought in some members. I was the newest person who got to do it, which I was super excited to be appointed to that working group because it was my first real legislative issue and project. So it was great. Me and along with maybe 4 other folks from the caucus, we were all, you know, engaged in those conversations. The number one thing that we want to see is diversity and participation, right? So whether that means Latinx ownership, Latinx employment, making sure that the opportunities are in our communities. For me personally, I see it as an opportunity to build wealth in our communities. And what a great way to do it, right? When you're in a burgeoning enterprise, right? This is really the ground floor. This is the beginning. And so finding ways to promote the opportunity, make sure our folks are educated about it, make sure they have all of the tools that they need to be able to participate. One of the frustrating things about this whole process has been that COVID has really put a damper on all of our abilities to be able to get the work done, right? So, you know, in terms of getting licenses issued, you know, that's outside of my purview, but even just trying to get something done at the legislative level was incredibly difficult last year. We met, I think, in Springfield for all of, I think maybe 10 days at the most. And it was all focused on COVID relief, you know, the very emergent issues that we had to deal with at the moment. And even at the beginning of the year, it was frustrating, I think, for all of my colleagues when we were down for the 5-day lame duck session. You want to talk about an incredibly stressful time. COVID being part of that equation, also having to have all-nighters. I mean, we pulled at least 2 all-nighters. Not to mention, you know, major issues. We had major leadership challenges at the time. We underwent a pretty significant leadership challenge at the the Illinois House. So all of those things happening at once. Cannabis was certainly on the agenda. We just ran out of time. And so, of course, on the legislative side, that means we have to start all over again. And that just takes time. And if there's one thing that I've heard from dispensary applicants is that time is the enemy, right? And Mark, I think you mentioned folks are bleeding money right now. I mean, if there was one thing that I took away from my conversations with applicants is that, you know, time is the enemy here. We need to move and we need to move fast. And the longer that it stays status quo, is the longer that the guys who have already been in the business continue to benefit from that. And the folks that we really wanted to give the opportunities to are still shut out, right? So from my perspective, you know, the sooner that we can at least address the lottery license, the license for the lotteries for the SocialEquity dispensary licenses, the faster we can fix that, the better I think it is for everyone. And I think we can all admit it was imperfect. But
yes,
you know,
and by the way, you know, I'm certainly, I think implementation is its own issue. right? Because there were just like math mistakes made and things like that. And so, you know, could have been done better by an outside contractor, right? You know, who would have thought that government itself could have probably done better? But
Right.
but you know, that aside, the law, I think, is a pretty good law. No law is perfect. And to your point, I'm not casting aspersions to anyone else. As a you know, paid advocate, I was very much at the table and involved in the issue, and you know, sort of you know, understand the dynamics. And I think, especially given everything that was going against it, we ended up at a pretty good place. But yeah, as we well, and I don't vouch for these numbers because I remember hearing them recently, but I'm not sure where I heard them. But it's like, from what I understand, it's like 3,000 jobs and $100 million that in tax money.
Mhm.
You know, so in R3 money that the state is missing out on
Yes.
by delaying. So that's something. What's your sense of the lottery solution itself? So that is sort of going into a you know, letting people fix their applications, then having you know, sort of an expanded 1A lottery that's going to go beyond the 21 that originally got in, and then there will be a separate, or under what seems to be the current draft that you know, has most people agreeing on most of it. There is a you know, a 1B lottery where, you know, anyone at a cutoff, and I think the cutoff itself is one of the main issues.
Yes.
You know, 90% or 85%, but everybody above that will get into the 1B lottery. So there'll be two pretty large lotteries. What's your sense of that? You know, and even just as a lawyer who's seen this before, I'm just thinking, like, some of this might encourage more lawsuits. Like,
Oh,
will this
yeah.
ever get resolved?
There's no question. You know, one thing that I can guarantee you is that no matter what we do, there are going to be lawsuits. And so, again, I kind of go back to my initial premise, which is the faster the better. All right, let's push these licenses out. I agree that there should be two lotteries. There should be a 1A and 1B. I think that the 1A folks, those are the ones that got the perfect scores, which, you know, I won't get started on the whole perfect score issue, but, you know, 1A perfect scores, 1B, you would have a cutoff percentage. I'm comfortable with 85%. I know that with some folks that seems a little low, but again, I remind people who I speak with all the time, it's not like an A or a B. I know that that's what we all think, but if you think of the 85th percentile, I mean, people who have hit the 85th percentile and above, those are incredibly good applications. I mean, you know, these guys may have missed a couple points here and there. Okay. So I think 85% is a good cutoff number. There are other folks that disagree, think it should be lower, think it should be higher. That's just my opinion. And then we have to talk about the number of licenses we're going to be issuing. So I think 75 was initially the amount. I think we've been talking about 75 for the 1A lottery. The 1B lottery, I think that question is still outstanding. Is it another 75? Is it 110? Because I believe we have the ability to issue up to 110 more. So do we just expand that? But then at the same time, you have folks that say, well, wait a minute, if you're going to issue all of those licenses out of just that first pool, what are we going to do when the second pool comes around? What are we going to do when the third pool comes around? So there's still, I say all that to say there's still a lot of policy discussion, I think, around what we want to see ultimately. But I think that getting through the lottery, to me, is the number one most important thing. We have got to move on past this because, like you mentioned before, we've got craft grow, we've got transportation. I mean, there's so many more issues that we need to deal with. Not to mention, I'm really excited about moving forward and possibly talking about delivery. I think delivery is a big conversation we need to have. You know, we still have a black market out there. One of the reasons that that black market is still there is because you can get door-to-door delivery, right? So anyway, there's
For
much
half the
more yet
price
to be
because
done.
they're not paying taxes or constrained by compliance, right? So it's setting up a market where the programs that the people that are supposed to be helped are actually the ones that end up the most vulnerable, and the criminal enterprises continue to flourish, and now the licensed operators continue to flourish, and the people get left behind.
Exactly, exactly. So, quick, fast, fix it, move to the next step, right? The one thing I will say about the legislature is that we are not always the fastest moving. In some cases, we can be really fast, but in most cases, we are not. So, it's just keeping that pressure on. And I credit the folks that are out there, our social equity applicants in particular. They have done a fantastic job of keeping that pressure on and not letting us get swept up in other things and saying, hey, we're still here. We still want to be a part of this industry, and we're going to push you as lawmakers to make it happen. So they've been incredibly patient, and also just a great source of pressure and to remind us that we still have work to do.
So, and when people ask me to guess, a lot of times I sort of sidestep it. I'm going to ask you to guess. I already gave you an out, but
as long as you know, I may sidestep it too.
yes, absolutely. I don't expect people to do things that I wouldn't do, but that said, what are sort of the chances that we move out of this legislative session? Let me ask you it this way. Will a significant number of licenses come out at some point before this year is over or not?
Yes.
Again, not, don't, yes. Okay.
I think yes. I mean, and that's certainly my intention, right? And I think a lot of my colleagues share that urgency, right? We want to see licenses get issued, and we want to move to the next step because we know it won't be perfect either. I mean, this is just going to be a process that we're going to continually have to be making better. It's one of the beautiful things of a legislative process is that you can always go back and fix something that didn't work. And so, for some folks who are maybe outside of the process, that's a bug. I think that's a benefit. That's part of why I think I was interested in being a part of it to begin with. You're always trying to make the policy better. You're always trying to get a process to a place where it works the best. So I think yes, it'll happen. It'll probably happen in this session. The session is going to be strange, much like last year. We're trying to figure out how to make it work in a global pandemic. But I do think that is the intention.
Well, I will say that the one thing that, that as a lobbyist that I know is that you all are working incredibly hard right now. And in fact, as the speaker, points out, there are committee hearings 5 days a week as opposed to 2 or 3, which we'd have if y'all were in Springfield.
That's right.
That's the one thing. That's why I like my job, because I respect most of the people that I disagree with because they work incredibly, incredibly hard. And so I like to underline that, but I also talk incredibly a lot, and Abraham doesn't say anything. Abraham, why don't you jump in? I'm sure you have something to ask or say.
I'll chime in and say, with the conversation of social equity, everybody has a different understanding of what that definition is. There's been a lot of clear debate on who qualifies for social equity, who is true social equity? What is the criteria for it? What does a successful social equity program look like? And, I think that we're still stuck in those conversations instead of getting to actual solutions. And that results in sort of an environment of incrementalism, which, to your point, you mentioned that that's the worst thing that we could be exploring at this stage. And so my question to you is, what is your view of what a successful social equity program should look like?
Gosh, that's a fantastic question. I guess.
That's $1 million question. I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean,
I guess.
I
guess
don't
what I
talk,
would
but when
say-
I do.
There's no right answer, I guess is what I'm going to say. There's no right answer, but I try to look at it through the lens of the folks that I represent, right? And what do they want to see? They want to see inclusivity. They want to see opportunity. And so if there is any person who lives in my district, right, which includes Logan Square, Hermosa, Belmont Cragen, Montclair, Galewood, Dunning. I mean, it's a pretty, and Elmwood Park. I don't want to forget my Elmwood Park. Anybody who lives in any of those neighborhoods should have an opportunity, whether it's to get a job, whether it's to start a business, whether it's to work within the industry in any other way, whether it's in research and medical, all of those things, just to have that entry point. Right. And I feel like the social equity applications is kind of a first step. I think there's still a lot more to be done. Right. I mean, I think about, I heard recently about programs that are being offered at community colleges where you get the Cannabis 101. And so you're learning about the industry, you're learning about business, you're learning about the grow, the horticultural side of it. These are opportunities at a community college, which I think makes a huge difference for the folks that live in my neighborhoods, right? So it's being able to get that education. It's being able to, participate in a program like this. I think about a lot of the social equity applicants that I talked to in the past few months. And, those guys are taking this huge leap of faith, and they are investing, their entire life savings to be able to jump into this industry with an expectation that there is going to be a payoff at some point, right? Whether, and I think that is kind of the quintessential American dream, right? Isn't that kind of what we all want? We all want to be able to go into that, into whatever it is that is an opportunity for us that can make us happy, and where we can be successful, right? And Mark mentioned, the immigrant story, right? I mean, this is what we all hope for. This is why, my parents came to this country, right? To create opportunities, and more opportunities than maybe where they came from. So it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I feel like it's such a big question, and I think equity has become this buzzword that people use and maybe don't fully understand what it means, right? And so, I want every person in my communities to be able to have the access, to have the opportunity to have, whether it's education, whether it's, employment. That's what I would like to see in the long term. And I just think that there's a lot more work to be done.
Amen. Abraham, any follow-up from you?
I appreciate the insight. I agree with you. It's a very big and loaded question. And I think for the purpose of this conversation, the focus around social equity has been primarily targeted for plant touching businesses, so retail or cultivation. And we even mentioned delivery, which is actually probably one of the more exciting conversations around social equity, because that would be something that I see as a business that is profitable and more accessible to members of our community who don't have the political connections, the investors, the startup capital to be able to start these multi-million-dollar businesses. And in terms of delivery or other sectors of ancillary, right? For us, we focus on media. And so it's just driving attention. We don't touch the plant at all. But I think coming out with solutions that allow people to service the cannabis industry, or as you mentioned, enter from a different angle, I think is where the real opportunities are going to exist. Because as we've all seen, the millions and billions of dollars in cannabis, it's already been made. All of that has already been claimed. Now we're essentially left with what's left when we finally get access to the industry. And so how do we innovate to create new opportunities that may not exist yet?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, look at, I spend a lot of time comparing the cannabis industry to the alcohol industry, right? Because, I think that they dealt with a lot of the same kinds of barriers, the same kinds of misunderstandings of the industry, and we went through prohibition, all that kind of stuff. So I mean, I think about those two industries kind of in similar ways. And I mean, the alcohol industry continues to innovate, right? There always is something new on the horizon. I feel like with cannabis, it's going to be the same. There's always going to be something new that we just have to make sure that the opportunities are available to everyone, and making sure that people aren't shut out, and especially when you're talking about communities that have been disproportionately impacted, right? That's where I come from. I mean, this neighborhood is, we've seen a lot of that, a lot of the negative impacts of that. And it would be great to see some of the positives come out of this industry come back here.
Agreed, especially post-pandemic,
Well,
where
thank
as
you.
Mark mentioned, people are hurting. They're looking for opportunity. I think that this is, to put it simply, desperation is the mother of all innovation, and I think that's where we're at, where they are trying times, but some of the greatest companies have been created in some of the most difficult of times. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out.
That's true. But again, we have much work to still do. So
100%.
Yeah, and we need to keep an eye on not just like, again, to both of your points, we need to keep an eye not just on like who's selling the plant or who's growing it. We also need to focus on where these pot companies are buying their copier paper and toilet paper. That's
I mean,
in essence just as important, right?
it is. I mean, my background, I've spent a lot of time in infrastructure, right? So, before I became a state rep, I had a previous life. And I spent a lot of time talking about access and opportunities associated with that. So even more recently, I've been thinking about how, some of these companies are building these new facilities. I mean, there's one in Skokie, beautiful building. I mean, I remember driving by there and saying, wow, that looks like a library. Like I could hang out in there for days, right? And you think about how the industry is going to continue to grow. There's going to be more construction opportunities. Are we looking at that in terms of diversity and equity and opportunity, right? Because that's my world. That's where I spent most of my time working in when I was at the CTA, and then with People's Gas, infrastructure and making sure that there were opportunities there. I think we have to broaden our vision beyond just the plant. But, again, the plant is the focus because we're at the very beginning of this process. But you're right, we can't lose sight of all the other things that come along with an industry that is successful and growing.
Well, I think this is a good place to end, given that we've already gone over the 30 minutes that we promised you we'd take. And State Representative Dina Delgado, you are awesome. It has been an absolute pleasure to get to know you a little bit. Please come back and tell us more when you're ready.
I would love to. And thank you guys so much for the opportunity. Thanks for having me here. This has been fun. And Mark, hopefully we'll cross paths in Springfield when it's safe to do so.
Thank you very much. And please tell Eric I say hello.
I will. I'll absolutely do that. Thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.